Hi, Nick Tockert here with the Historical Fencing Guild. Today we're going to be talking a bit of combat theory as opposed to the practice, which is what you usually see. People love the sparring videos, but we need to get in behind what goes on with those. And one thing people have asked me, and my students have asked me, is for more lectures on dealing with multiple opponents. So this week, I'm going to do a video on just that, how to approach multiple opponents. And to speed it up, I threw the first thing up on the whiteboard. And this little graph is talking about your ranges. Now, when you are fighting, and I talk about this in my book, there are 3 ranges that you have to keep track of. The first range increment is the length of your arm. So no one, unless you are killing them actively at that moment, no one should be within the circle. And I would say, at least in America, save for rare times as a self-defense thing, you shouldn't let anyone inside the circle transcribed by your arms. If they are, you should know why. If you're standing in line, you should be paying attention to the person in front of you, person behind you. This is just basic self-defense, because you don't want bad things to happen to you, and in that kind of reach, the worst things can happen easiest. So you have to control that circle, and that's what melee combat is all about. It's controlling concentric circles. Now, once you have this circle controlled, you go out to the next circle. The next circle is the maximum comfortable extent of your weapon. So, from my arm to the sword tip, beyond my reach, comfortable. We're not talking lunges, okay? This is that. You have to control that at range next, but only after you control this range. Now there's a third range here, and this is the maximum reach with a lunge. And we're talking, again, as I've spoken before, a comfortable lunge. I don't, especially in melee, want to see people doing the excessive, way deep lunges, because it leaves you vulnerable side to side. And I'll get to that in a minute if I need to re-demonstrate. But when you are approaching multiple units and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I deal with people? You have to assess them, and you have to control these ranges. So, if we're going to control these ranges, obviously, this is not static. You are moving. They are moving. But the circle always moves with you. And when you engage them, you want to think about what you're doing next. You don't want to dwell on it, but you want to have an idea. What I mean is, okay, if I have a guy here, obviously I have to deal with them first. But where I am relative to the other two starts to affect how I fight this guy. So if I'm fighting this guy, where I want to circle optimum is this way. And I want to transcribe this route. Because what you always want to do, unless your attackers are trained in fighting as a unit, it gets different when you're dealing with people who are trained in fighting against a unit. And we'll talk about that too. But if your attackers are just a mob, that's a group of people who, even if you're, playing a scenario, you're LARPing, whatever you're doing, you can tell real quickly if they've been trained to move as a unit or not. Big gaps, they're not cohesion, not a lot of communication, good signs. So what you want to do is you don't want to just pop this guy, because if you just pop this guy, you've wasted an opportunity. You want to pop this guy and use the fight to stave off this guy. There's an odd matter of the way the bystander effect often will affect people, and it's how you see it a lot in Hollywood fights, but even in real fighting, until the ring forms up, you often have a moment where you can use them as a sort of shield. So they have to come, You don't want them to ever have a straight shot at you. Now this guy, of course, has a straight shot at you. So, the best thing you can do, and I feel like John Madden over here, is circle around. You've neutralized this guy. You've gained distance for this guy to be able to get to you. You've nearly added a third more distance by engaging and hopefully neutralizing your first target here. That means this one's going, people will move at you. You want to keep, it's not running, it's not cowardice if you're outnumbered. And at any point in the real world, if this is survival and you get a chance to run that way for an escape, do it. But we're not talking survival, we're talking, a melee combat thing. So, you circle around, negate this guy, engage this guy, but you always want to keep one opponent between you and the next. You don't want to fight them square. Okay? So this is optimum. This is what you're always shooting for. You will rarely get it. But you zap this guy, you engage number 2 because he's the next closest. Boom. Now by then, this guy's gotten into your business. But by then, you're now it's just a one-on-one. And one-on-ones are all about the controlling the line of attack or abandoning it if you're running a more Spanish system. And that's straightforward. One-on-one, we don't have to worry about. What we worry about is 3-on-1 in this case. So, let's go back over it. And I'm going to get these circles out of the way because they're a little visually distracting. If you have multiple opponents, they are dispersed, but coming usually from a general direction. So you have you, we're just going to keep it in one color. One way over here. They are all seeking to engage you. Now, again, what you want to do is try to keep the line of sight of your opponents blocked. This is really helpful if they have projectiles, because if they're going to, if you're dealing with archers, or, I guess if you're in LARP casters who are throwing, beanbags or whatever, doesn't matter. People throwing rocks, theoretically shooting, but I really don't like. My approach on Firearms is leave now, leave fast. This is not that video. You are not Steven Seagal. Just don't do it. But engage. If you can neutralize from that one, you want to always be working away from the farthest in its tight group. You want to force a fight to happen on your terms. Okay, Nick, that's real good, but what happens if they know what they're doing or they're moving together? This is why I am a defensive fighter. I'm a defensive fighter because I prefer to choose my fight instead of let somebody else choose it for me. What that means is, if there are 3 people and I am 1, even if I am engaging them, as long as I have room, I want to evade at least to start, because what's going to happen? Unless the group is incredibly disciplined, they will not advance as a line. Okay? The whole line will not move forward, again, unless they're disciplined. That's a different ballpark. What happens is a group of 3 starts to break up by speed and aggression of your opponents. So what you get usually is one will surge forward, one will kind of follow, and one will hang behind a little bit, either due to limited mobility, difference in stride length, simple difference in attitude, and it may not be always this. But as soon as they start breaking up, you now have a pattern you can work. And you want to quickly, if possible, bump off this guy and then scoot. It's a sort of shoot and scoot mentality. Get him off line, bam, bam, take your shot and get out of dodge again. It can be a tiring approach, But as long as they're pursuing, they're getting tired too. So this is why cardio is so important in fencing and combat. Now, that's all well and good, but what happens if they're aligned? If they're, instead of doing a pulse that you can break up, what if they insist on proper formal legionnaire marching? Okay, one, if you're doing that, that means you have a lot more mobility. You have to use that. What you want to do then, whenever dealing with a line, no matter how long it gets, you want to hopefully harry a single edge, because to deal with a single edge, a line has to either bend or break, where instead of looking like this, they start to kind of curl in on themselves, which usually opens up gaps here, especially if you're not fighting alone. That's a different ballpark too. Or, and frankly more often, one person will break off. Now if one person breaks off, you have again, you're back to that one-on-one, which is what you want. You want one-on-one, but you want to handle it fast. So this has to be, no finesse. You don't want to finesse a lot. You don't want to be, you want to do it, get the job, simple, pop, and get out. You do not want to lose your legs. Because then you have two. Now let's talk about two, because fighting two people breaks down into a very different dynamic. Usually, if you're yourself and you're fighting two people, there are only a couple things will happen. They're trained to fight together. What they'll do is either they'll both try to flank you in a pincer, which is basic tactics. This gives you a couple things. If they're flanking you in a pincer, you can either shoot down the middle to disrupt it, or again, retreat with the intent to engage. So what you're doing is you can bait one of them, and then that just takes the dynamic back to, they have a shorter line, so you have to deal with him first, and then them. But you want to choose your opponents. Now, this is where it gets a little dickish, depending on the conventions that you are fighting. And conventions is a term I probably should explain. Conventions is, I'm sorry, hold that. Conventions are the rules of combat in whatever game you play. If you're SCA and it's Rapier, you're looking at the Rapier Hand Marshal's book. Handbook rules, very lengthy. If you're looking at heavy, again, the Heavy Marshal's Handbook, Amp Guard puts theirs out. And those are the rules of how you score, points, how we kill each other. Strip fencing is the same way, but the movement is much more contained. It's not in the round. But if you're fighting two opponents who are really good, occasionally what you'll get is this. Now, two coming straight at you is actually much harder to deal with, in my opinion, if they're trying to work together, than dealing with one-on-one. Because that's just, you have to manipulate the battlefield if you can, stay light, stay mobile, get around. If it's two coming at you, what you're going to have in a train group, and this is how I teach people, if you can figure out, you have one who is the binder, tangle, and one who is the attacker. This style of group, if they can approach you in a tight line, they're controlled, now you have a problem. Because now it's more like you're fighting one very large entity with more arms than you. Especially if they work together. And that's what I try to train my people to be. The ones who've been around me longest are pretty good at it. It depends on the numbers of people we're playing at any given week. How much we can actually focus on that. But what'll happen is the binder's whole goal is not to kill you. It's simply to knock your weapon offline. So let's say I'm fighting sword and board, okay? Well, that is a pretty sword. Wow, okay. Wow, that's a long sword. Anyway, I'm fighting sword and buckler. Cool. What'll happen is one will devote all their energy to just getting a hold of my sword, the top down, shoulders, bam, bam. We'll go right-handed. Let's say shield, sword. Okay? The binder just wants to move this sword out of the way, and they're not going to worry about attacking me necessarily, so that the attacker can spank. It's shady, it's ruthless, it's how you fight. Now the trick is, if you can figure out who's who, usually they're less likely to switch roles. Because once they've decided it, they have to communicate between themselves somehow. And some of that stuff gets nearly telepathic, I swear. You fight with somebody long enough, and you can feel what they're going to do as they're doing it, or even before. You trust me on this. And then you have to decide who you're taking out. So a lot of times, which the only way I found, preferably, to deal with this is fake the binder. Okay? Put yourself in a position that looks like they'll be able to bind you. Do something visually stupid. It's one notch more than a fade. You're going to go do something like you're going to plane your swords. If you have two swords, and one thing I tell people never to do, unless you're doing it on purpose, is plane your swords, because that way, hang on, bad guy can sweep your weapon away with one weapon and then come in with another. We don't want that. This is just one person doing the two roles, but one with each arm. And when I get into discussions on dual wielding, we'll talk about that. But fake it with the intent of, you've already planned it. So as soon as it looks like they've committed to binding, do something. Either quick pop at them while moving away from the binder, moving away from the attacker. So it's like, basically you bait. Let me get a different color going so you can see it. You bait this guy, making him think he's doing his job, or her. And then you, again, because this guy's going to be linear. The attacker's going to just be coming in, or more, they're going to try to flank around like you would a line. So you want to move to negate him. That's basically a full body void. Just get out of it, make sure you're out of his range. While you're doing that, pop that guy, and now you're back to one-on-one. This is not an exhaustive course. Obviously, this is just the beginning of a discussion. It is the thing is, people think multiple, one on multiple is impossible. The problem is you have to train like that is your mindset. I would rather have somebody approach every fight. Pardon my bit of foul language, but I say there's always another asshole. And I think of that in terms of fights. I've seen so many fights where, real world, one dude is squared off, and another dude, I lost the red cap again. Anyway, is squared off, and he's thinking, blue dude thinks it's a straightforward fight, doesn't realize red dude has a buddy. So what happens is blue dude does something that limits his mobility. Maybe he brings the fight to the ground because his background is cage fighting, and those dudes are freaking devastating one-on-one. I'm not saying they can't handle it, but I'm saying styles that bring you intentionally to the ground can limit your mobility if you have multiple attackers. So it doesn't seem like a good, more combative approach. And I try to keep the nature of where my art comes from always in mind. So if you go and, you two are now on the ground tangled up, maybe you're choking the dude out, his buddy's just going to come and do something really unpleasant, probably with something sharp to you. Oh, so there's always another hole. Line tactics get a little more complex because then it takes more people and more analysis. And a lot of times when you're dealing with a large melee, I'm talking like you have a scrum going where, red team is like 6 dudes. Green team is like, we're going to say 5 dudes. And you've been drafted. Oh, this sucks. Because you don't know if your line commander's any good. You don't know. You're way down at the end. You can tell you're at the end because the important people, the ones with like line commanders or whatever, they're going to be up here because they want to engage each other. Again, this is experience based in more SCA and LARP type stuff than practical, but you don't see a lot of line combat. What's going to happen is it's going to break up, and it's going to get ugly, but it's going to break into this sort of scrum. That's the tangle when the two forces hit in the movies. These smart swordsmen, realizing that there's a scrum, especially if they're outnumbered anyway, wait a beat. Wait just a second. And let the scrum engage. This is a little cowardly, I'll admit it. And line commanders don't necessarily like it. But if they're all tangled up, what you end up with in this field is you end up with a row. And it looks like, 2 guys, 1 guy, 1 guy, 1 guy, whatever. And it will look something like this. We'll add the stars. And they're all duking it out. This is where a proper scoundrel, e.g. proper swordsman in my opinion, because I like to stay alive, simply flanks around and begins systematically assassinating the distracted enemy. If you can pull this off, if they are focused on what they're doing, and you're a sneaky, underhanded, unkind, unchivalrous fighter, you can devastate the enemy line. I know this because I did it. It was underhanded. It was not chivalrous. But I don't care at this point, because when you get into a melee mentality, as soon as it becomes groups, it's no longer a matter of, theoretically a duel or honor. It's two groups of people trying to kill each other over something. So you have to be underhanded, and you have to expect the bad guy to be underhanded. Always, always, always thinking what I call red team applications. Red team applications is always approach a problem when you're looking at a situation, step out of yourself and look back at the situation. What if you're going to mess it up? What would you do? So it's like if you're trying to protect somebody on the field, think about how somebody would act, and then plan to that. Well, yeah, that can be a deep rabbit hole. You can start cycling. Well, if I do that and do this, you don't need to take it too far, but you always want to stop and go, okay, if I was a bad guy, what would I be doing right now? And usually the bad guys will do that. So either you use an approach of a fate where you leave some kind of vulnerability to help encourage them to do something that you want them to do, or you make really sure your plan is reasonably ironclad. I want to talk about something else that I see happen in melee, especially objective melees, and this is the hint. This style line, the line did not hold like it's supposed to. Line, advance, break off. There are ways line combat is supposed to work, and this is not it, theoretically. And we will do a whole video on line combat at some point. That gets into commanding troops, and it gets a little more complicated for, our applications. But I'm much more of a skirmish guy anyway. I like small squads. That's where I excel. That's where I should stay. Napoleon's greatest problem was he was really great tactically with small, to skirmish-sized units. The bigger the units got, the less wieldy his approach was. But that's armchair generally. The other problem is this. If you have an objective, and this is what I drive into my students. I hope to drive into you too. Victory conditions. Pardon the world's loudest crows. Victory conditions. Your objective. What are you trying to achieve? Now, if it goes from we're just sparring to kill each other, yay. But sometimes it's something like, excuse me, protect the blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it's a person who's acting as a princess. Sometimes it's capture the flag. People lose sight. What happens is they get so caught up in fighting duels and doing stuff, they forget the reason they're doing what they started to do. They're so caught up in fighting. A lot of times we do escape and evade. We have somebody in, their goal is to keep somebody else from leaving the list field. However many people, maybe it's an escort. The people leaving the list field, all they have to do to win is leave the list field. The people preventing that, what they have to do is for a set amount of time, keep the people in the list field in the list field. And then there's killing and maiming. But it always breaks down, or very often, to people forgetting that the goal is just to get out. So you should block that, or whatever. You get that. Capture the flag, ditto. If you can get enough people scrumming about and, they're fighting, they're having fun, go in, sneak in, get the flag, get out, win. Now, why do I talk about victory conditions? Why do I harp so much on victory conditions? Because we're going to talk about real life for a second. Your victory condition, if you are by yourself, is to survive. And I always put this on at the end when I talk about melee, because melee starts getting into self-defense. It starts hitting. Survive. I don't want you to be a hero, okay? Heroes have to deal with law enforcement. Heroes get hurt. Heroes get killed. I want you to survive. If you are engaged and you have any way out, exit. Take it. Always. Don't, I'm going to fight and prove my honor. Honor does you no good if you're dead. Okay? Now, it's different if you're trying to defend a small child or someone you care about. You have to kind of hold the line to get them out. I get that. That's a different victory condition. But if you have no other victory condition than you're out somewhere and somebody's trying to hurt you, your goal is not to end their world. Your goal is not to be justice or vengeance. Your goal is not to be macho, brave, TV show. Your goal is to survive through any means possible. So I want you to always keep that in mind. We'll get into scenario fights. I have several that I run. I'll talk you through them. If I can get my students to do some, depending on who comes out this week, we might be able to even get the guild to get into that a bit, and then I can show you applications. But this has gone over a half hour. I try to keep my videos shorter than this. This has just been an intro to dealing with multiple opponents, just a theory video. We'll talk about actual combat techniques in another video if you're interested. Like, comment, subscribe, share. I really love hearing from you guys. It means a lot to get a question or a comment back, because I want this to be a dialogue. If you like what I'm doing, please consider becoming a Patreon subscriber. The link will be down in the gobbledygook. Or look into my book, The Simple Sword. 2 great ways to really help me do what I'm doing. Okay? Practice, do your drills. Are you drilling? If you're not, you should be. I have a surprise that I'm going to be unlocking from the Patreon side of things to the regular side. It was supposed to be earlier. We've had some technical difficulties. We'll try it this week. Okay? And I'll announce that depending on how practice goes tonight. So, as always, support your local swordmaster.